recruited from Berkeley, Dick Arneson and Jerry Doppelt. Dick did ethics, and Jerry was a historian of science with a strong interest in political theory. I think that was in 73 or 74. We also hired, Fred also hired Henry Allison, an eminent cat scholar from Florida, and probably Zeno Vendler in 1975, who, like me, was an analytic philosopher and who come to us from Canada. Still later, we added Pat and Paul Churchland from Canada, both of whom worked on the human brain. As I look back on those days with the outstanding coverage we had of the main fields of philosophy, from classic to contemporary, I think we had the best department in the world. Anyway, that's my view of the history.
Thank you very much. Now, the next speaker is going to be Henry Allison, who is also a research professor emeritus here at UCSD, past president of the Pacific Division of the APA, author of a true masterpiece of scholarship in the history of philosophy, his book Kant's Transcendental Idealism, which is only one part of a trilogy of works on Kant, including Kant's theory of taste and Kant's theory of freedom as well. His latest book, Oxford 2008, Custom and Reason in Hume. So, Henry.
Thank you. When I came here this morning, I didn't think that I was going to be giving a philosophical paper. I thought I would be reminiscing about some of the high points and, from my point of view, also low points in my experience from 73 till 94 and then a couple of years afterwards. But after Don's remarks about the new field of the philosophy, of departments of philosophy, I realized that I am doing real philosophy today. And so not only that, but I have provided a metaphysic for the philosophy of, and I think it's the appropriate one, it's Leibnizian, because I think each member of the department and graduate student and staff should be thought of along the model of a monad, and we each represent that department from a particular point of view, so I'm not going to give an objective, excuse me, Normo. Okay? I'm not going to try to give an objective picture of the department, but I want to depict it from the point of view of this particular monad. And this particular monad is one who came here with a deep interest and commitment in the history of philosophy as a part of philosophy. That view is still contentious today. I think it was more contentious in the early 70s. The opponents of that view are different. I mean, back in the early days, with the fortunate people like Avrum, who certainly didn't fall into that category, ordinary language philosophers tended to minimize history. Today, the conflict is more with people who emphasize the significance of science, although the history of science plays a role. But my whole vision of the department here is, and what I'll say today is modeled around what I took to be the role of the history of philosophy, and since I also, this is perhaps the epistemology of the, now I've given you the metaphysics, the epistemology of the philosophy departments is also Leibnizian, and it can summarize in the principle, the dictum that every philosophy is true in what it asserts and false in what it denies. And I think there's a deep truth in that. I think Paul this morning also suggested that he was somewhat of a Leibnizian, although we seem to come from different schools of Leibniz, because Paul seems to take more serious than I do this idea of a pre-established harmony, where we're all working happily together in the best of all possible worlds. I guess I have a more Miltonian picture. I was going to organize my personal monadology around the themes of paradise, paradise lost, and paradise regained, again with poetic license and no claim to objectivity. Okay. So I'll begin with paradise, or comparative paradise. In addition to I came here from Florida, as Avrum mentioned, in addition to the vast improvement in climate, what impressed me and brought me to UCSD was its strength in the history of philosophy. Popkin had just left, but the Journal of the History, JHP, was here, and there was a strong interest among faculty and graduate students, and I remember my early seminars on Kant were well attended. I didn't turn out many PhDs. They came later, but there were a number of really good students who were not going to be historians of philosophy, not to mention Kant scholars, and that was fine, because they all thought that doing the history of philosophy and studying Kant, even if it involved suffering under Allison, was probably a good thing, and I did nothing to discourage them. So people like Jeff King, who went on to become a major name for himself in philosophy of language, Laurie Schrager, who is not here today, I don't think, and Alison Shalinsky, who is here.
Michelle Greer.
Well, that's a different category. She was a PhD student. I'm talking about good students that I remember who weren't specializing in Kant. Couple of anecdotes. The department made some great appointments at that time. Zeno was mentioned by Avrum. Zeno, of course, was not an historian of philosophy, but he knew an awful lot of the history of philosophy, not only Descartes, but medieval philosophy. And the department made two appointments that I was very pleased to be part of, and that's Bob Pippin, or as we now call him, Robert Pippin. He was just Bob in those days, and Nick Jolly. Well, I'm sorry, Sir Nicholas. A little bit about Herbert. Herbert's name has been mentioned. When I came, he was no longer teaching here, I think thanks to Ronald Reagan, among others, but he was still very active force in the department. And I was impressed to find a Marxist who smoked good cigars. I never found out if they were Havanas, and who drank good whiskey. So a couple of anecdotes regarding Herbert. One, the summer of '74, which was after my first year here, it was the year of the Watergate hearings. And we were having a party at our house, and Herbert was there. And interestingly enough, he was affirming vehemently that Nixon will survive. Because I guess this is a reflection of the corruption of American capitalism, that Nixon would survive. I respectfully disagreed. And we started to make a friendly wager. And since I was slightly more astute than Herbert as a handicapper, because because I had spent some time at Del Mar. And since he was so supremely confident in the truth of his view, I managed to convince him to give me 12-to-1 odds on a bottle of Chivas. Well, later that month, what happened? Nixon resigned, but I only actually collected one bottle because maybe it was my Kantian, or maybe it was just weakness.
Henry, may I tell another anecdote about Herbert?
Well,
We're going to have a period just afterwards. Let's let Henry get through.
okay, I've actually skipped one, but I will say, Norma and I were going to take a visit to Germany, which was going to include the Black Forest at Freiburg, Herbert's old hangout, and we asked him, what would you recommend? He said, you have to go to the Stadt Freiburg. It's the best hotel in town. And he was right, but he forgot to think about the cost. It was about a month's salary in those days, and in retrospect, I should have collected that full case, but I didn't. The other anecdote is only parenthetically related to Hegel, but it relates to Herbert. It relates. that was Stein Freudian slip, and that involved directly Fred. Fred, I guess it was 74 or 75, scheduled a Heidegger conference here. And Herbert was gone out of town. I don't know where he was, but Fred had interviewed Herbert and had a film. And so there was this great filmed interview of Fred asking Herbert, and Herbert was telling about his student days with Heidegger. And then we had a fascinating conference where really the big names in American Heidegger studies, which was a fairly small group at that time, there was Bert Dreyfus, of course, and Richard Rorty, and Charles Taylor, I believe, and the most interesting one was Marjorie Green, who is a student. And Marjorie said something I'll never forget. She said that there were 3 things that Heidegger couldn't stand. Americans, Jews, and women, and that she met all 3 criteria. Later on, we know that Heidegger had this steamy affair with Hannah Arendt, so I guess by a process of elimination, it must have been Americans. I was going to talk a little bit about my fairly uneventful days as chair. This was one of these times of department crises, or not department crises, but university crises, where funding was scarce, if not existent. Unlike now, yes. I just want to give one sad episode from my time as chair, the one thing I'll never forget. The only kind of appointment we can conceivably make in those days was an affirmative action one. And so there was competition among the departments. And with some reluctance on some people's part, and we decided to compete, and we ended up with 3 very good candidates. I'm not going to mention them by name, but they represented 3 wings of the profession, which more or less paralleled the 3 wings of the department. And we had this very contentious department meeting where, not surprisingly, we couldn't decide on anybody. I mean, there was a slight consensus for one, but nothing you'd want to go forward with. So that was